Well, welcome back to the channel, guys. My last video, you joined me on the River Nene at Barnwell and I did a hemp fishing video. Now, having watched it back, it was a little bit slapdash, I've got to be honest. I sort of put the camera in one place. Had a nice session, don't get me wrong, but there was probably not the detail in it that I would have liked to give you. So I thought I'd come back to the river, different stretch this time at Ringstead, again on the Wellingborough ticket. Beautiful stretch, as you can see I've got a beautiful platform to fish off. This whole stretch, the road's just here so you can park right behind your peg. I can fish off the platform, absolutely brilliant, really convenient, which is what river fishing is all about. And I just thought I'd go into a bit more detail. The kingfisher there, look at that, beautiful. I thought I'd go into a bit more detail about the hemp itself, the hook bait, the tears, the rig, and I just thought I could like pick apart each section because although the information was in that last video, probably the detail wasn't. So without further ado, let's show you that rig. Okay, so the first thing to dissect with a little bit more detail is the rig itself. Now, on the last video, the 4x12 float was amazing. Now, there's a little bit more pace here, but again, I think the 4x12 will be the right float. And the float itself is a Chianti, which is just such a good float. Now, one little tweak I do with this, again, we're all about the details today, is I get some orange float paint from Benick Sports, beautiful stuff, and I just give this a few coats. I just like to thicken it up a little bit, obviously makes it a bit more visible, but the more important thing for me is actually thickening the bristle up, so I can fish it as a dot and see it a long way down. That's just really important to me. It's something I've always done, it's something I always do with all of my floats. Above that is probably a little bit deeper here, so I've probably not got as much line, but the rig itself is on a Preston top 4, which is a top 5 of like a Daiwa pole or whatever. I've got a long line though between the elastic connector and the float. Above the float, probably 18 inches or so, I've got a little number 8 start as a back shot. Now that will just help me control the float, and if there is any skimmy wind or anything like that, it'll just give me a bit of control. I can take that off obviously if I need to, but for me that stays. Now I've got a depth marker here, which it'd be quite hard to see, but I've got a depth marker. That's really important when you're hemp fishing, especially on here because there's a lot of weed to contend with, so I'm going to have to find a level where I can get bites and not get involved with the weed too bad. That's just the problem with the Nene. But having that in place, just a lot of your fishing will be done off the bottom, so having that there is so important because I can just use it as a reference point. On that day I was catching probably 10 inches off the bottom. Today I might have to fish 18 inches off the bottom just because of the weed. So that depth marker is so important. I plumb up to the bottom of the body like I always do, dead ship style, and it serves me well. So below that, the rig, again, we're into the details today, is on 010. Now that's quite light for me. I don't generally like to use light main lines like that, but because the float's so delicate, I could get a bit of a howling downstream or anything like that. I think 010 just gives me, it just cuts through the wind a little bit better than say 012 or 014 would. Although I'd like to use that because I've got a lot of shot on my line, the 010 just gives me a few more advantages in my opinion when it comes to presentation. Then moving down, this is where obviously it starts getting interesting. I've got number 12 shot spread roughly 2 inches apart. A few of them have moved actually because I used it the other day, but they're about 2 inches apart, and let's see how many I've got. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 number 12 shot there. Spread out in probably, I don't know, 2 foot area maybe. Like I say, this will help me catch fish on the drop, of course it will, but more importantly, I'm more concerned about, how can I put this, the rig catching the flow. So all these little shot will just, it creates a bigger surface area under the water. And what happens when on these slow rivers, often you get wind and stuff that sends your float through, like skimming through. So it looks faster than it actually is. Now, the problem is with that, obviously it drags your rig through badly, which is just not natural. So I'm doing everything I can down this bottom end to try and pick the flow up under the skim, if that makes sense, to try and get it moving through the swim at the same pace or similar to the float going through, if that makes sense. So that's what all them number 12s are about, and obviously I will catch some fish on the drop as well. Then down at the business end, I've got that 50 centimetre hook length that I talked about. Again, not everyone's cup of tea, but for me that is so important. Like I say, it's not an easy river this. Even though we've had a load of rain, it's still gin clear. I can see the bottom all the way out. Fooling these fish is not easy. And I just want everything to behave as naturally as possible down this bottom end. So that's 08 AccuPower, and then I've got a size 20 or 18, I'm not too fussy, N10 hook, which I think is like the perfect sort of pattern for hemp, because it's got a bit of a long shank which allows me to click it in, and I'll show you how I do that in a minute. But that long hook length for me is just a nice little advantage. Like I say, it's all well and good reading your bites quickly and worrying about all that sort of business, but on these harder rivers, the Nene, venues like that, the Warwickshire Avon, stuff like that, you've just got to get a bite in the first place, and having that longer length, I believe, gets me more bites. So let's show you how I'm going to hook the hemp, and then we'll talk a little bit in detail about the feeding. So let's get on to the next part, which I think is super important, especially on these harder venues, and that is hooking the hemp. It can be a bit tricky, but if you prepare your hemp right, very, very easy, very simple. However, I believe that on these sort of harder rivers, that actually hooking the hemp each and every time you go out, as in pushing it on fresh, is better than using, say, cotton, like Nuddy and that use on the Fenland venues where you're catching, like, they might catch 150 fish on hemp, so they've got to use something that makes the hemp stay on. However, when I'm fishing like this, it's gin clear, the fishing's hard, I need something that's a little bit more discreet than that, and obviously pulls through. So you've got a really good hook hole, because each fish has got to count when you're on a harder river like this. So let's scoot round to the close-up camera and I'll show you my preferred way of doing it. Okay, so what I'm looking for is a grain. I've got all sorts of different grains in here because obviously I've cooked the hemp and tares together. But I'm looking for one that's only just split. Now for speed in a match, I'd probably do this separate, but I'm looking for a grain that's only just split. Something like that one there. Now it's got a lovely little bit in it, and this is where the N10 sort of comes in, because I can just push that in there and it sort of clicks in, and hopefully you can see that is exactly, that will stay on, no problem at all. I've got a bit of point showing, it looks really nice, that's really well presented as far as I'm concerned, and that is how I do it. It's as quick as that. Like I say, if you're bagging up on Fenland venues or something like that, then it's probably a little bit, it's time consuming, you want your hemp to stay on, but for this sort of fishing, I think that's perfect. So as you can see, the advantages of that N10 style hook with the longest shank is clear to see there, because it makes it easy to mount the hemp. So there you go, nice and simple. That's how I do it. Right, so I've been fishing a little while now, and I thought now's the perfect time to talk you through it, what I'm doing. So I've got a camera over my shoulder to hopefully make it a bit more easy to follow. But basically, as I'm fishing, imagine, you know, obviously on a clock face, I'm looking at 12 on a clock face. I'm feeding at where 10 o'clock would be, so where 10 would be, maybe 11 actually. So a good 2 meters downstream of bang in front of me. Now there's not a lot of flow today, but there is a bit more than there was the other day. And doing that allows me to get my rig settled, because I'm using a light float, get it settled and trundling along, and it gives me that meter to catch a fish above the feed, which for some reason with hemp it happens a lot. So I'm getting a lot of pike trouble today, so the action's a bit stop and start, but when I get it right, it's quite rewarding, because it's the nice fish today, not massive but just nice ones. So there we go, we're out with the 4x12 rig, bit of a downstream wind at the moment, so when I hook a fish I've got to be really quick. So I'm putting that rig well above, a good metre above my feed, then I'm putting a pouch of hemp in and 2. Now, it's not like the other day, I'm not getting bites instantly, I'm having to really work my rig. So you see it's settled there, that's in amongst my feed now, when my feed's hitting the water, a bit more flow, and then what I'm doing, I'm giving it, letting it run a foot, lifting it out, let it run a foot or so. So I'm in touch with it all the time. Lift it out. I'm constantly working for my next bite. Let it run. Right, there we go. So I've got to be quite quick, because like I said, there's a few pike about today. Well, loads of pike to be fair. But a lovely roach today. Look at that, beautiful. Hopefully that, top lip, just lovely that. Like I said, a really nice stamp today, sort of 3 ounce average. Lovely fishing. Interestingly, I got done by a pike before and I broke my rig, so I put a 4x14 float on that I had tied up, and it weren't as good as this 4x12, so I've got off my box and I've retied my 4x12. Like so. Right, so good metre above my feed, a decent amount of hemp, 20 grains or so, and hopefully that'll settle right where I'm fishing. So it's settled now just above where the feed's going in, and it gives me an opportunity to get a bite above the feed and then running onto it and below. So no bites. It is ever so weedy here today, so the pike and the weed are making it quite tricky, but I'm well off bottom. I'm a good 18 inches off bottom. If I go any deeper, I just get stuck in the weed. So, oh, little bite there. Again, I'm just, even when I get a bite, I'm not giving it a big strike. It's just a nice little lift. Hopefully you can see that in the video. It's just such a lovely, rewarding way of fishing. Bit of a downstream wind now, but I've got 2 number 9 back shot above the float now. It's really like stabilise it, and it's working a treat. If I didn't have that, my float would definitely be just skimming through almost uncontrollably. So every couple of fish I do get a pike strike, so just getting now to where that last fish was. I'm just going to let it run and lift it out. And then if I get to this part and I haven't had a bite, then I will just feed again and repeat the process. Oh, that was a bite. It's constant work. This is, you know, it's hard fishing. This is today. It's nothing like it was the other day. Really nice though. Oh. I have to be a bit aggressive with the fish because of the pike. There's actually one sat on the end of my keep net as we speak, trying to get what's inside. It's quite frustrating. So I'll put another piece of hemp on. I've not tried a tear again yet. Happy to just plug away on the hemp for now. Nicked in there, lovely. Now interestingly, them 2 bites were quite far down. It's not been, the fish haven't been, so I'm going to actually put it in well above this time and see if there's a bite above again. Maybe that I have to bring my feed upstream a bit. Because the problem is, with this weed as it is, I don't actually have much of a run. Now there's a lock about 500 metres below me today, maybe a bit further than that, and obviously when that opens up it gives me a real nice flow to work with. So we're just running it through, I say just lifting it every metre or so, give it a little lift, and it just sort of puts that piece of hemp in front of the fish again. There we go. I'm actually going to break down there because I think that's the best chance of getting them away from these pike. Straight out. Lovely fish. So you can't have a hemp fishing session without the hemp itself. I'm more than happy to use tinned hemp for feeding. It's nice and big, it's really well cooked, there's loads of white showing. Fish absolutely love it. However, for the hook, it needs to be slightly less cooked than this is. So we'll head back to the kitchen. I'll show you how I go about preparing my hook hemp and also a few tears that might get me a few bonus fish along the way. So let's get back to the kitchen and I'll show you how I do it. Okay, so we're in the kitchen again, and even I can't get away with preparing hemp properly in the kitchen by simmering it and boiling it and stuff. So I've got a nice little way of doing it. Now, I'm really happy to use tinned hemp for feed. I absolutely love it, it's convenient, and a couple of tins of this will last you a session. What I do like about it as well, it's nice big hemp. So even when I'm fishing at 14 or 16 metres, like I often do on rivers to get out into the flow, because this is a nice big grain size, it actually works really well. I can group it nice and tightly. Some of the stuff you buy dry, like this stuff here, is quite small. But the only problem is with this stuff, you can't really put it on the hook. It's how they cook it, like pressure cooked almost. It's like it splits to the maximum. Perfect for the fish, they absolutely love it. But to actually get it on the hook is quite tricky. So what I like to do is really small batches of hook hemp and hook tears that I do. And all I do it with is a tiny little flask like this. Like I say, you can simmer it, you can like boil it and all that sort of stuff. But I don't really like the smell of it in the kitchen, to be honest with you, and I'm sure my wife definitely doesn't. So got that nice little flask there, and it makes it super easy to prepare. So this is some stuff that I've had done last night. Hemp and tears. Just done it in the flask, and it's perfect. The tears are nice and soft. When you squeeze them, they split into two, sort of split in half, which is perfect. They're not a mush, and you can just nick them on the hook absolutely perfectly. Really, really nice bait, that. And then all I've done, I've got some hemp in there as well that went in the flask at the same time, and that is only just split, which is perfect. That's exactly how you want it for the hook. So you're getting the odd grain that's burst wide open, but the majority are only just splitting, and some of them are, you've almost got to like prise them open to get the hook in. They're perfect because they'll clamp onto the shank of the hook perfectly and stay on really well. So that's why I like to do it in the flask, because if anything, it's probably the hemp is probably underdone for feeding, but for the hook it's perfect. So I'm just going to show you quickly how to do it. Like I say, I did that last night. Really simple stuff. Like I say, you just want a nice little flask. Obviously, if you wanted to do 3 pints of hemp for feeding, you can do it in this way. Just leave it in the flask for a little bit longer. Probably do it at the lunchtime the day before. But this nice little flask is perfect for just doing the hook hemp. Like I say, I'm more than happy to feed the tin stuff. But for the hook, I do like to do my own in this little flask. So I got some tears from the shop. I'm not a massive fan of tears, I've got to say. I much prefer to use hemp on the hook, but there's no doubt about it. On some rivers, the Trent, places like that, especially when you're pleasure fishing, tears can be a brilliant hook bait. You know, it can outscore hemp. Definitely can. Especially when there's a lot of small fish present, tears can be really good, especially in the height of summer. But for me, I really, really like hemp on the hook. Match the hatch. So what's interesting, normally when you're fishing, you normally use smaller particles and then use a bigger hook bait, like a standout hook bait. But with hemp fishing, I actually go the other way around. Because I'm using really big grains of hemp for feeding, I actually like a really small piece on the hook. Now, that might sound a bit backward, but when you actually think about it, it makes perfect sense. Roach have got tiny mouths, really. They're not like a chub or a perch or something that just engulfs a bait. Roach have got tiny little mouths, so I want a nice little hook bait on most of the time. And the hemp in my local shop at the minute is quite small. And I actually like that. But no good for feeding this, because if you loose fed it, it'd scatter all the way across the river with no accuracy at all. But for the hook, this is perfect. And actually, so as soon as I saw this bag, I'm like, I've got to get that because it's nice and small for the hook. So a bit backward, but trust me, you'll miss less bites on these small grains. Right, so all I've done, got myself in a little flask, and I've just got a tiny amount of hemp and tears, just mixed together, like a palmful of each, not even that really. And I'm just gonna get it in the flask. Just pour that in there. You can pre-soak it if you want to, but I've never found it makes that much of a difference, to be honest with you. I think if you wanted to prepare your feed hemp this way with a bigger flask, then you probably want to soak it for 10 hours or something before. Now, what I like to do is get a bit of bicarb, just a teaspoon of bicarb, wash that in there. That just helps to make the hemp much darker. Just a confidence thing really, more than anything. People use like iron tablets and stuff like that. That can also work really well. I'll just get the old flask, the kettle. Wash that in there, nice and slowly. Get that in there. Right to the top, so there's plenty of water in there. And that'll do. Screw that up. I'm going fishing tomorrow, and that, give it a bit of a shake, that will be perfect in the morning. Perfect hook hemp, just like this is. Absolutely perfect. And what I like to do as well, if I'm doing it, any sort of good, if I get a really nice batch, like that's a really nice batch of hook hemp, that is, I don't mind freezing it as well. So after a session, even if I've only got a poundful left, I will put it in a plaggy bag and freeze it. Nothing goes to waste, and obviously once you get a good batch of hemp, it's really important to keep it. So that's how I do it. Nice and simple in the flask. You wouldn't believe that will be ready in the morning, but it will be. It'll be perfect. Like I say, freeze anything that you've got left over. Use the tin stuff for feeding because it's a bit bigger, or buy big stuff for feeding, whichever one you want to do, and cook it yourself in a simmer. But like I say, I can't get away with that. And that's it. So let's get back on the bank and hopefully catch a few fish. Okay, so the fishing, it's actually really nice. It's quite totally different to what it was in the last session, in that I'm getting quite a lot of pike strikes today, and it's definitely unsettling the fish. There's definitely not as many fish here today as what there was on that other stretch of river. But what it is doing is it's making me work really hard for each fish, which is really interesting. And they're a much better stamp. They're probably, don't know, certainly 3-4 ounce roach rather than those sort of little dumpy 2 ounce ones. 4x12 rig doing the damage. And what is actually quite interesting is I'm actually catching downstream of the feed today, whereas obviously in the last session I was catching them above the feed, which not too sure why that is. As you can see, there's a pike just jumped out there. There's pike everywhere today. They're sitting on the end of my keep net. They're really a bit of a pain, to be honest, but you know, you've got to put up with that on natural venues. So what I'm doing, like I say, I'm feeding nicely downstream and running onto it. Oh, missed that one. And it's all about finding that little killing zone. So there's definitely a killing zone at the bottom of my peg where the fish is obviously happy at the minute. That will change throughout the day. It might, you know, they'll come above, they'll sit right below the feed, they'll sit right downstream of the feed, but it's all about working out. And luckily, because I've got that long rig on, I can definitely work out where those hot spots are. Now I'm having to be a bit aggressive with the fish when I hook one, because the pike are so ravenous today that if I fanny about at all, they're having them. So I'm just being I'm having to be quite sharp, get back, break off a section soon. So I'm actually swinging like a top 6 in. It looks a bit, just allows me to pluck the fish out the middle of the river rather than dragging them over the near weed bed where them pike are sat. And it's really nice fishing because, like I say, it's not like it was the other day where it was loads and loads of fish feeding. It's a bit more like having to work for every bite at the minute. Oh, a little bite there. Okay. So one thing that's quite tricky on this stretch is the weed. So I'm having to fish well off bottom, and I actually think I'm fishing much higher up than where the fish actually feed in, which is a bit of an issue. But if I go any deeper, I'm getting stuck. So it's kind of what I'm having to put up with at the minute. So just put that grain of hemp on. And put tear on actually. Let's put tear on this time. There's a pike sat right on my keep net. There's one here and there's one there. So there's actually 3 sat on my keep net at the minute. Oh, little devils. So because the roach have gone a bit further down than probably what I'd like, I'm actually going to move my feed upstream by a foot. It might not sound a lot, but it can just bring them up into a catching zone because there's not that much flow. And because of the weed situation, running down there is making it quite difficult to catch them. So I'm just thinking about adjusting where I feed. So as you can see, I'm breaking down well too soon, just so I can get them out of almost pluck them out the middle of the river before a pike sees them. But they're lovely fish. That was on a tear, that one. Let's give that a go again. Just trying to find a smallish tear, nicking it on. Just lovely fishing. I love it. See, only having to fish it at about 11 metres today, just onto my 13 metre section. So I'm just going to bring that feed up a foot. Try and bring the fish up a little bit. Make them a bit easier to catch. So these are the things you've got to consider when you loose feeding. Thinking about where you loose feeding is everything. It's not like ground bait where I've got a hot spot in my swim. I've not put any ground bait in today. I've just put a scattering of hemp in at the start with a big pot. Oh, kingfisher, beautiful. And then loose feeding. So it's everything where the fish are in the swim is all governed by where my loose feed goes. So, oh, that was a bit aggressive on my part. So yeah, when you're loose feeding, it's all about making those small adjustments. And like I say, I've brought, in the last 5 minutes, I've brought my feed up by a foot. So hopefully I'll start seeing the rewards from that in a minute. I'll start getting more bites higher up my peg. It's quite frustrating because every time I get it going, I get a pike strike. But there we go, that's the right under the bait, that one. That's a better roach. On pike. Lovely. So that one, I come right underneath my bait, that one. That's a lovely fish. Look at that. Beauty. Proper hemp fish, that one. And that just shows you that how reactive it is, because them fish are already coming up a bit higher than what they were. So sometimes it's like these subtle changes, and it's what, you know, your Tony Marshalls of this world, who are amazing hemp and loose feed anglers. I don't want to just say he's a hemp angler, but a loose feed angler, that's what they're so good at. Working out where to feed the bait, how much to feed, and where in the swim to feed it, and then introduce the rig. Okay, so we're going to try and catch one more, and we'll have a bit of a recap. Now, it's been a little bit frustrating with these pike. I don't want to bang on about it, but every time I get it going, I catch a nice fish and then pike comes along, but you know, that's what happens. So just as a recap, we've got evident that the fishing today, fishing for a totally different stamp fish than what we were doing on the other video. You know, they're much bigger today. They're sort of real quality roach actually. I don't know, probably 4 to the pound probably. Real nice roach. I'm having to swing them, but it's only because of the pike. Normally I'd net them. That's the sort of stamp they are. Which obviously when they're that size, it means that you're building a weight really nicely without really thinking you're catching a lot. And that is sort of hemp fishing all over. Obviously keys have been that light rig. Definitely been the rig today, 4x12s. Just seems to get you bites. Adjusting where I've loose fed has been important. Obviously I started feeding well downstream, but the actual fish dropped down rather than up, which is unusual. Sometimes it's the other way around, but today it's been the fish have actually dropped below the feed, which is quite nice. But so what I've done, I've slowly brought it up where I'm feeding to try and get them exactly where I want to catch them. Can't go on that little one. Sorry, I'm just, oh no. Look at that pike, nearly got that one as well. So just managed to get that one. Sorry, I was in a bit of a flap then because that pike was right behind it, but we got him. Yeah, so that's it. So that's sort of my hemp fishing. Really nice style of fishing, and over the next few weeks it's going to be absolutely prime. The rivers are in good trim. They've had a bit of water now, not this one, but other rivers around the country have had a nice bit of water now as well. So there should be plenty of roach to be caught in the next few weeks. So thanks for watching everyone. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you again on the next video.